And we have found that in the writings of Shoghi Effendi, and in the House of Justice, and in Abdu'l Baha, and Baha'u'llah, he keeps referring to the idea that there are forces that have been released by this revelation. And when we talk about forces, we need to understand that the whole concept of what a force is has changed in the last 150 or 200 years. For a long time, it was believed that the powers of the world were things like air and fire and wind. You know, originally the concept of the forces were air and fire and wind and water and so on. And for a long time, there was never any knowledge that there were hidden or mysterious forces in the world. I'm talking about physical forces first, because until we understand physical forces, we can't understand spiritual forces. So I just want to give you we'll talk a slight history about what happened surrounding the appearance of Baha'u'llah. I want to go back to May 23rd. May 23rd of what year? May 23rd of what year? I want to go back to May 23rd of 1752. Just for fun. Exactly 92 years before, but also May 23rd, okay? Because for thousands of years, human beings observed something that we call static electricity. Static electricity was so they noticed that sometimes if you combed your hair with a certain thing, you would get a shock, or if you rubbed your feet on something, you get a shock. You know, sometimes you could rub a balloon on your shirt and it'll stick to the wall or something like that. And it was always considered a curiosity. Just something that, you could, make a little trick with or something, but there was no use to it, and who knew what it was, and so on. And the American Benjamin Franklin was the first to propose that maybe electricity, that was what was in lightning. He thought it was in lightning. And he proposed a number of experiments to see if you could prove if there was a power in lightning, and this power that would be called electricity. And he said you'd put a key onto a kite and send it up there. He never actually did that, but he wrote that down as an experiment. But then he created another idea, an experiment. He said you could build a very tall rod that would go high into the sky. And that rod would go high into the sky, and you'd have electrical wires. And if a lightning came, it would hit that rod, it would come down, and you could find out whether or not there was electricity in the sky. This was it. And he wrote that down as an experiment. He never did that experiment either. But the French loved Benjamin Franklin. The reason they loved Benjamin Franklin is he was opposed to the British. And anything not British, the French loved. So they loved Benjamin Franklin, and so they took his writings and they built one of these devices. And it was in a little village, a little bit north of Paris. They built this big rod and put it into the sky. And of course, you have to wait for the gods to thunder, to clap. So they built it and they put it up, and they waited and they waited and they waited. And then on May 23rd of 1752, lightning hit it, and it went down, and they could discover that lightning had electricity. And this is the first time human beings ever knew that there was electricity in the universe and that it was a power. Isn't that interesting? Now, and it's interesting it was May 23rd too. I just find that interesting. So, between May 23rd, 1852 and May 23rd, 1844, that 92-year period until the Bab declared his mission, there were many discoveries about the nature of this mysterious force that nobody really understood. And of course, particularly Alexander Volta and Michael Faraday, I don't know if you know, they gradually worked out that electricity was the same as magnetism. There were magnets, and they knew they could point towards north, or they could attract other metals. The power that was in a magnet was the same power as electricity, which is in itself quite strange. Would you agree? That magnetism and electricity are part of the same force. And Michael Faraday did tests, and he found that they could form little fields. And a field means that it kind of acts around in a way. And there was really no use for electricity until a man by the name of Samuel Morse, I don't know if you know Samuel Morse, okay, he somehow worked out that you could take an electromagnet. In other words, you could make a magnet and pass a current through it, and it could actually send electricity through a wire. It could send electricity to a wire. And what he basically did is that he was able to do that, and he tested it and created a telegraph. A telegraph. And when was that telegraph created? On May 23rd of 1844, exactly as the Bab was speaking to Mullah Hussein, he tested this and he found that a current could go through wire. Okay, now, he sent one message, the first message ever sent, and it was a quotation from the Bible, "What hath God wrought?" And that's very interesting, because prior to that day, May 23rd, 1844, when the Bab came, the fastest communication anyone could communicate to anybody was the speed of a horse or a train. Okay, how fast can a horse go or a train go? That was as fast. And a train, you could, if I wanted to get a message to Elango and he lived in another part of the country, maybe I could get it to a train, but someone still has to get it to the train station and across and there. There were a few other ways that I could get a message to Elango, maybe by pigeon, okay, or smoke signals, if he was close enough, or beacons of light. These are the ways in which, you understand? So the speed was basically a horse or a pigeon or a train or something like that. And then in one day, the speed of communication became 93,000 miles per second. 93,000. Okay, how fast is 93? How many of you can go 93,000 miles every second? Okay. That's a huge difference in communication speed. Okay? Basically, it was about half the speed of light because of the nature of the wires and so on. Is that not an amazing thing that communication suddenly went from the speed of a horse to 93,000 miles a second in one day? And it was exactly the same day that Bob declared his mission. Don't you think there's something kind of strange there? Now, from 1844 until the passing of Baha'u'llah, okay, he died in 1892, there were more discoveries about the nature of this mysterious force that no one had really understood. And a great experimental scientist, James Clerk Maxwell in England, formulated theories that united electromagnetism and created the concept that there was actually an electrical field that can exist in space with nothing in between. Now, this is very strange. And then finally, Hertz and Oliver Lodge, I don't know if you know this, in the 1880s, 1890s, worked out a way in which you could upset those fields. And for example, there was a great experiment in August 1894, just not even 2 years after Baha'u'llah passed away, in which more than 2,000 scientists all gathered at the British Museum. And Oliver Lodge, he put two devices here together like this. And one created electricity and put it in there, and it went to a receiver. And the thing was only this far apart, from here to here. And this far apart, there was nothing in between. And he put a little bell here that received it, and he pushed it here, and the bell rang. Okay? Do you understand what happened? And the people saw nothing in between. This was considered the most amazing thing on the face of the earth. No one had ever known that something, a force, could act at a distance. That a force could act without anything in between. Today, if I push this and a bell rang, you wouldn't think very much of it. But that was considered the most exciting thing. And of course, they had basically discovered radio. They discovered radio, the radio wave. Now, since that time, we have gradually learned that the universe is powered really by four forces. There's only four forces in the universe, and they all have similar properties. The first property, and what are the four forces, by the way? Does anyone know what the four forces are now? They're not wind, and they're not fire, and you know what the four forces are? They're gravity, electromagnetism, and two nuclear forces, what we call the strong and weak nuclear forces. But they all have certain properties. First of all, the first property of a force is that it acts at a distance. It acts at a distance. There's nothing in between the Earth and the moon, and yet gravity seems to act. What is gravity doing? How does it work? Can anyone know how gravity works? It acts at a distance. So is it touching? Is there a string? Or you understand what I mean? It's a mysterious thing. The same with electricity. Electromagnetism acts at a distance. Maxwell worked out that electromagnetism, electricity and magnetism, was also part of light. That light is also part of that. And then, of course, Einstein used those theories to work out all kinds of other things. So first of all, they act at a distance. Second, they act within a field. A field means that there's a certain area that they act. So you can have an electromagnetic field, or you can have a gravitational field. So in other words, there's an area in which they act. A field is like, a football field is a certain area. Well, there's a field in which these work. And the third is that they cannot be seen by the eye. These are forces that are invisible, and they act at a distance, and they act within a field. And this created the idea of field theory. There's fields that go. And they can affect things at great distances. For example, how many of you are familiar with quantum mechanics or quantum physics? Anyone familiar with that? There's a theory of quantum fields and quantum entanglement in which certain atoms can affect other atoms at very great distances. I mean, huge distances. Not only separated by space, but even separated by time. You don't even start reading about it. It's crazy. I mean, how does something affect something across time? But there are fields that cross time, and there are fields that cross space, and things can act within that. Now, this led, in the 20th century in particular, to many field theories about powers that exist that aren't even part of these four. For example, the great philosopher Teilhard de Chardin, the French the Jesuit philosopher, who the Universal House of Justice actually cited in the peace message when they said the planetization of mankind, he postulated that there's something called the noosphere. You know how there's an atmosphere? He said there's a noosphere, and Noah means mind. And there's a sphere of mind that individuals can all connect to, and the human race has this collective sphere. It's also the concept of a field. There was a great psychiatrist, psychologist, C.G. Jung, German. Do you know who he is? He postulated that mankind has a collective unconscious. And if you read his writings, and he has much proof, archaeology, history, and so on, that there's some kind of field that human beings also are connected to, and people can be connected. Today, scientists like Rupert Sheldrake, if you're interested, look up on the internet, Rupert Sheldrake, and he has proposed and conducted experiments to say that there are some kind of morphic resonant fields in which all species and human beings somehow are connected. So in other words, there's a great notion today that there are forces that are invisible to the eye that can connect people and things and so on. And if you were to talk to someone from 200 years ago and tell him right now in this room there is radio and cell phones and television and radar and microwaves, would they believe you? They would just think you're totally crazy. How many of you know that right now in this room there's radio? It's everywhere. Look around. Can you see it? But do you believe it's there? Every time you answer your cell phone, you really realize what's going on when you speak on your cell phone? What's exactly happening there? There's a signal going from you to outer space. Actually, let's get it right. You're talking to your cell phone. There's a signal going from you to a tower within a few miles of you. And it's going from that tower to outer space. Okay? And it's coming back from outer space to another tower close to your friend, and then it's going to your friend. How fast is that happening? 186,000 miles a second. 186,000 miles a second. Isn't that amazing? And that's happening, and we don't have any money. Do we care today that there's TV in this room? We don't think about it. But think how amazing that is, that all of this happened exactly between 1844 and 1892. All these discoveries. Because in 1844, they first worked out a way to transmit electricity across wires. And it went at about 93,000 miles a second. And during Baha'u'llah's lifetime, they worked out how you didn't even need wires. Because we don't use wires anymore. Do you know that? We don't use wires anymore. And it was only in 1894 that they stopped using wires. So forces, physical forces, have somehow just kind of expanded and expanded and expanded. But this coincides with the spiritual forces that came in the world. I think that the two are related to each other. Now, are there spiritual forces that can act at a distance? That can act at a distance? Are we aware of this fact? For example, Baha'u'llah says, and this is in one of the prayer books, but you can also read it in Gleanings, he said, "Whoso reciteth in the privacy of his chamber the verses revealed by God. He says, I don't have the exact quote with me, but you know the statement? He says, if you recite the verses of God, the scattering angels of the Almighty shall scatter it abroad, and will cause the heart of every righteous man to throb. Is that amazing? Okay, now, who are these scattering angels? Does anyone know who they are? I remember Collis Featherstone said that he was always wondering about these scattering angels, because, you know, basically someone says a prayer, and the angels say, oh, there's a prayer, and take it all around the world. And he said that when he was growing up, whenever you started working in a company, the first job you got was a messenger boy. He said that whenever you started in the old days, the first job, and then you worked up, but your first job was a messenger boy. So he thought maybe when he dies and goes to the next world, the first job he'll get is to be a scattering angel. And he thought that was funny. Of course, today we don't have messenger boys so much, but it's very interesting to think that you go into your room tonight. Just go into your room tonight, privacy of your chamber, recite the words of God, the prayer or the words of God. The fact that you at a distance can affect every righteous man on the planet. Is that not interesting? And Baha'u'llah says that. And we have many other statements in the writings about these forces. Now, Baha'u'llah says that the whole world hath been upset by these forces. Let me read this. It says, the world's equilibrium hath been upset through the vibrating influence of this most great, this new world order. Mankind's ordered life hath been revolutionized through the agency of this unique, this wondrous system, the like of which mortal eyes have never witnessed. So he's saying that something has been released in the world and has completely upset the equilibrium of the world. How messed up is the world today? How messed up is it?
Very, very.
It's completely disordered, excuse me, it's completely deranged. But why is it deranged? It's deranged because there's an other system that has been presented. Baha'u'llah has presented a new system, a new world order, a new way in which mankind should be ordered. And the very presence of that has caused the other thing to be completely disordered. And so all the disorder in the world, everything you see in the world, we should view as natural. We should view completely as natural. In the same way that if you look at a garden, you'll see plants dying and disintegrating. All gardens have disintegrating plants and growing plants. But what does the materials of the disintegrating plants do? What do? They end up going back in to the new ones, because this is, we call it death and transfiguration. Everything disintegrates and then transfigures back in. In fact, in physical creation, there is no annihilation. Nothing ever disappears in physical creation. It only transforms into something else. So right now, the world is going through a disintegration so it can integrate back into this other thing. But if there were not a new system, there would be no disordering of the old system, because it is the world order of Baha'u'llah that has deranged the equilibrium of the world. Now, who is building the world order of Baha'u'llah? Who? It's us. We are called upon to build this new world order. And until we build it, I don't know if, because first of all, if you pull the rug out from something, there better be another rug that they can all step onto. Does that make sense? In other words, or if you burn a house down, you better have built a house across the street that they can all run into. So here's the point. There are two plans going on. One is that God is burning down one house. We call that the greater plan. And the other is that we're building a house so that when that house is finally completely burnt, they're all going to run out, and into this house. And the two things are going simultaneous. And the only way in which we can build that other house is to somehow draw on the same power that's been released in the world. Now, Baha'u'llah promised, he says, that a band of believers would arise in the days after him that would do this work. He promised that there would be some kind of band of believers. And so I'm going to read this. He says, the day is approaching. So when he says the day is approaching, and he's writing probably before 1892, obviously, he's saying that very soon something's going to happen. He says the day is approaching when God will have, by an act of his will, raised up a race of men, the nature of which is inscrutable to all save God, the all-powerful, the self-subsisting. So he's saying that he's going to create a new race of men. And he says, ere long, out of the bosom of power, he will draw forth the hands of ascendancy and might, hands who will arise to win the victory for this youth, and who will purge mankind from the defilement of the outcast and the ungodly. So he's talking about a certain group of people who God will raise up, who will take this power. And Abdu'l-Baha has said that you are those people. Now, what did we do to deserve to be those people? To be able to receive this power and to build this new system. He says, these hands will gird up their loins to champion the faith of God, and will in my name, the self-subsistent, the mighty, subdue the peoples and kindreds of the earth. They will enter the cities and will inspire with fear the hearts of all their inhabitants. How many of you, when you enter a city, do you inspire fear in the hearts of all the inhabitants of the city? Anyone do that? Okay, I don't think it means that you're going to scare them so much as that they are going to just be amazed at the power that you possess. Such are the evidences of the might of God. How fearful, how vehement is his might. Now, there is a statement from the House of Justice, I'm going to go back and read it, in which they, well, I don't have to read it. You can see it in the Rezvan message. Go back and read the Rezvan message. They said that when the Baha'is carry out the 5-year plan, when we execute the activities, they said that it is not just the Baha'is and those that are participating in the activities that are affected. Go back and read the, I think it's the 8th or 9th paragraph of this year's Rezvan message. He says, when the Baha'is have their activities, you know, their study circles, their junior youth gatherings, and so on, they say it is not just the Baha'is that are running it and those attending it that are affected. They said the very spirit of the place is affected by it, the very community, the very city. So when you go and have a meeting in Singapore, maybe 5 or 6 people, you may think that you're affecting those 5 or 6 that come. Or we got to get more people. Now we're affecting 10 people, 12. The House of Justice says when you do that, you're not just affecting those 5 or 6 or 10 or 15 people. He said the very spirit of Singapore is changed by it. So do not lose heart and think, oh, I only have this many people. As many people as you can get is all you need, if you can create that spirit. Because the House of Justice said the very spirit of the place is affected because of these spiritual forces. And we're also told that unless we are conscious that he will assist us, we will not do these things. So I began by listing 6 things, and I asked some of you to raise your hand if you're doing them. Teachers of the faith, study circle children, and so on. And a lot of us will not do them because we think we're not able to do them, or we think they won't work, or we think the people are not receptive. How many of you have some of these thoughts? You think perhaps the people aren't interested in it, they aren't receptive, maybe it's very hard, maybe in this particular part of the world the people are this way or that way. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Everywhere I go, everyone has some kind of excuse like that. And over again, we're told in the writings, don't worry about that. Don't think about that. But there's one thing they say particularly never think about, and that is your own weakness or your own inability. Because if you think about your own inability, you definitely will not do it. In the same way that, how many of you will jump off a 50-story building and try to fly? You won't do it, right? Why won't you do it? Because you perfectly well know that you cannot fly. So you won't do it. But what if I were to tell you, and you believe me, that if you jump off, you can fly, and I was right, okay? You'd have to have an awful lot of confidence before you jump off that building, isn't that right? How much confidence do you have to have? An enormous amount. Okay. So, this is the dilemma. We have to be conscious that that power is there before we'll do it. Otherwise, we'll look at our own weakness. So the very first words the Bab said in his opening message of the Letters of the Living, he said, heed not your weaknesses and your frailties, fix your gaze upon the invincible power of the Lord. So let me read you a few statements like this. This is from Abdu'l-Baha. He says, he will come to your aid with invisible hosts. and support you with armies of inspiration from the concourse above. He will send unto you sweet perfumes from the highest paradise, and waft over you the pure breathings that blow from the rose gardens of the company on high. He will breathe into your hearts the spirit of life, cause you to enter the ark of salvation, and reveal unto you his clear tokens and signs. Verily, this is abounding grace. Verily, this is the victory that none can deny. Is that an amazing statement? Because this is what God will do. But when will he do it? Will he do it before you arise or after you arise? You see, a lot of us, this is a mystery, a lot of us say, well, God, give me all that power, and then I will arise. Okay? And it doesn't work that way. He says you must arise and do it, and then the force will come to you. And this is a very complicated thing, because it means we have to have a certain amount of faith to arise. And that's why the House of Justice says that when the Baha'is are succeeding, they must be aware that they have these forces. But you have to arise first. Now, I think I already mentioned that a car cannot be steered if it's standing still. Did I mention that yesterday? Well, go outside and take a car that's parked and try the steering wheel. Does it work? Okay. Until the car is put in motion, the steering wheel doesn't do anything. And Baha'u'llah cannot steer us until we first put ourselves in motion. So power does not flow until we first arise, and then the power comes. But you might say, give me the power first and then I'll work. And then it just doesn't happen. Now this is part of the discovery of forces, because we have learned that forces also only flow in if they flow out. We don't know why this is, but electricity was the first one we discovered. If you take electricity and you don't let it flow out, no electricity can flow into it. Did you know that? You can prove it yourself. Go to an electrical wire that's really high. You know those ones that are high. Do you have those here in Singapore? No. You don't? No. They're all under the ground. But go to a country where there's electric wires on the ground and jump up on them and grab them. And there's thousands of volts. You know what will happen to you if you jump and grab the thousands of volts? Nothing will happen to you. No. Nothing will happen to you. Try it next time. Nothing will happen to you, even though there's thousands of volts. You know why? Because you're not touching anything for it to go out. If the electricity doesn't go out of you, nothing will come into you, and you'll be fine. The birds land on them and they don't burn up. Okay? What is this thing?
Sometimes the wings touch the other wire.
I'm sorry?
Sometimes the wings
don't touch the other wire. And then it'll flow out. Now, this is how we first discovered electricity, because they were doing experiments with electricity, like they were putting it into a dead frog's leg, and it would bounce or something like that. You know, things like that. I don't like in the 1870s and stuff like that. And they figured out you could store it in a battery, but sometimes somebody was doing something and the electricity flowed out, and they found it came in and the frog leg moved, and they discovered what's called an electrical circuit, that when it flows out, it flows in. Now Baha'u'llah says a similar thing in the Hidden Words. He says, love me that I may love thee. If thou lovest me not, my love can in no wise reach thee. Now when I first read that, I thought, is God being really spiteful, like a little kid? Like, if you don't love me, I'm not going to love you. Like, that's what it sounds like, doesn't it? And I don't think it's that, because he doesn't say I won't love you. He just says my love won't reach you. It doesn't reach you if you don't, in other words, if you don't love out, no love can come in, because it's just the law of forces. Something so we discovered this with electricity. Now, if you do not, you cannot get that spiritual force unless you give out. Now, imagine a hose. Let's say the hose is this long, and water is coming out from it. Say I block the hose at this end. Can any water go in the hose after it's filled? No more water can come in the hose. Now let's say I take the top off. Now, if water is going out of the hose, can water come in? So water can only come if it's going out. Here in Singapore, you get all your fresh water, I believe, from other countries. Is that right? Yeah. But it all works on pressure in your houses. Okay, so in your house right now, there are faucets, you know, water faucets or whatever. There's pressure, but there's no water coming into the house until you turn the faucet on. And then as soon as you turn the faucet on and give water out, water comes into your house. This is what spiritual forces are like. They're pushing on you all the time, but there's nothing coming into you until you start to give it out. Just like a water faucet. But as soon as you give it out, it flows in. And you're connected. You can have as much power as you want. So the point is that we're told the Baha'i must arise first and teach. And when he arises and teaches, then suddenly the power flows. And so really, we're just hoses. We're not, like, in other words, if you're a hose and water comes through you and you let it flow out, the water will keep coming in. As soon as the hose starts thinking he's the water, then he's dead. Okay? Never think that you're the water. You're not the water, you're just the hose. The hose is just a bunch of rubber, but it's very useful. So we have to understand that we can be like a hose. So Abdu'l-Baha constantly told the Baha'is, don't worry about what you have to say, or what, in other words, many times Baha'is would come to Abdu'l-Baha and say, what do I say when I teach? He rarely answered that question. He would always say, look at my face. See my face before you, and look into their eyes and love them, and the words will come to you. In other words, he didn't give them the words, because he told them what to do so that the words would come to them. There was one talk that Abdu'l-Baha gave in which he said, whenever you're about to speak, see my face first. He said, see my face first, and then look at the audience and love them and speak to them. And I heard this statement first by John Robarts, Hand of the Cross. He said it when I was about 15 or 16. I heard him say this. I thought it was very interesting. And then later on, when I became a conductor of choirs, I traveled around the world. Every time I had any choir, I always put Abdu'l-Baha in the choir, in my mind, okay? And I always put him right over there, which is where the sopranos are, even though Abdu'l-Baha is probably not a soprano. I would put him right there, and I got so used to it that I would just come, and Abdu'l-Baha was always right there. And I always looked at Abdu'l-Baha. Sometimes if a singer, like a solo, was out here singing badly, I would look at Abdu'l-Baha, And sometimes I would say to Abdu'l-Baha, Abdu'l-Baha, please open the audience's hearts and close their ears. I would say and stuff like that. And I got so used to this that I started to put Abdu'l-Baha's picture in my notes before every talk. I put his picture there, or in the old days I would write 2 eyes and like just 2 eyes like that was like Abdu'l-Baha's face, just when I didn't have. And so I always followed this example of looking at Abdu'l-Baha. Now I don't know if he was definitely there or not. I have no idea if he was definitely there or not, but it certainly relaxed me and calmed me and helped me in all my music whenever I was ever conducting choirs. And then when I started speaking about 4 or 5 years ago, I do it religiously. And Abdu'l-Baha actually is in that chair. It's a good thing that it's empty. So if it's not empty, I kind of put him there. And Abdu'l-Baha said, no, it's true, he's right there. And I got so good that when I see Abdu'l-Baha, I see his white robe, the wrinkles on his face, the beard. You get stronger and stronger at seeing Abdu'l-Baha there. And Shoghi Effendi said that if a Baha'i is confident, he said that the Baha'i teacher must be all confidence. Therein lies the secret of his success. In other words, if you have that confidence. Now, if you feel like Abdu'l-Baha, if you walked in the room now and Abdu'l-Baha was right there with you, how good would you feel? You'd have a lot of confidence, wouldn't you? So that's the secret. That's the secret. There's a prayer that Abdu'l-Baha revealed, we call it the Tablet of Visitation, where he says, if you recite this prayer with lowliness and fervor, it will not only bring gladness and joy to Abdu'l-Baha, but he said it will be even as meeting him face to face. How many of you would like to meet Abdu'l-Baha face to face? Obviously, He says all you got to do is say that prayer. So these are mysterious things. Abdu'l-Baha is right there, face to face with you. So this is a power. So the point is that we somehow have to have the courage to arise to teach. Then we will get the power to do it. Now this is an irony. There's a statement of Baha'u'llah. He says, the source of courage and power is something. You know that? It says the source of courage and power is blank. Who can tell me what the source of courage and power is?
Promotion of the Word of God.
It's promotion of the Word of God. Don't you think that that's the opposite? In other words, you have to promote the Word of God and then you get courage and power. But don't you think you should have the courage and power before and then you'll promote the Word of God? Doesn't it seem like the wrong way around? Like in most cases, you try to encourage someone, give them encouragement and power, and then they do the thing. Here he's saying it's the other way around. Do the thing, and that will give you the courage and power. It's a bit of a mystery, isn't it? But it's the same with electricity. Until it flows out, it won't flow in. So the source of the courage to teach the faith is to teach the faith. If you look at any plug, electrical plug, it has two. Do you know that? Why does it have two? Why do all electrical plugs have two? They actually have, some have three. But the third is just grounding to the earth.
In and out, one in and out.
You're in and out. They're in and out. You're an electrical plug. And so you need to remember this, that you are not a generator of love to mankind. You are a circuit of love from God. God has the love. He loves everybody. And you are a circuit of God. You're a circuit of the love to God. These are the spiritual forces that are available to you here. Let's read a few more statements of Abdu'l Baha in this regard. And let me know if I've gone too long. Here's Abdu'l Baha again.
Yeah.
Selections to the writings. He says, "Rest ye assured that if a soul ariseth in the utmost perseverance, and raiseth the call of the kingdom, and resolutely promulgateth the covenant, be he an insignificant ant, he shall be enabled to drive away the formidable elephant from the arena. And if he be a feeble moth, he shall cut to pieces the plumage of the rapacious vulture." How many of you sometimes feel like you're an ant in relation to an elephant when you're trying to teach? I mean, in relative circumstances. How many feel sometimes like you're just a tiny moth, okay, and the others are vultures? We often feel this way. But he says, if you arise, this will happen. Let me read another one. He says, "Whenever holy souls, drawing on the powers of heaven, shall arise with such qualities of the Spirit, and march in unison rank upon rank, every one of those souls will be even as 1,000. Remember I said that before? He says, whenever they arise with such qualities of Spirit, every one of those souls will be even as 1,000, and the surging waves of that mighty ocean will be even as the battalions of the concourse on high. Now, where does this power come from? Where does this power come from? Who wants the power? Who wants the lightsaber? Who wants the